I was going to ask Claire if you can name all the characters behind you.
Oh, there's Rupert, Gavin, Mia, Denzel, and Bodge.
Great, thank you. And that's a perfect segue because I think we're live now. So welcome everybody to the London International Animation Festival 2022. This is the Getting Animation Off the Screen from Pixels to Products industry discussion. And I'm very pleased to say we've got the industry stalwart, Jo Redfern, with us. You'll have seen her performing yesterday if you were attending any of the talks yesterday, and Claire Underwood. So let's just remind you about what this panel discussion is. Before we do, I'd just like to say get well soon to Emma Calder, who caught the lurgy, caught COVID. She's doing all fine, but she didn't want to hallucinate with her medication during this panel discussion. So we wish her the best and see her next year. But this is Getting Animation Off the Screen from Pixels to Products. So, as you're aware, everyone dreams of income streams from animation-related merchandise or revenue and fan interests from tie-ins like miniatures or books. But getting your animated character or world off the screen and into people's satchels or bedroom shelves isn't easy, despite universal access to promotion through the internet and social media. We asked our group of animation and marketing experts here to talk to us about the possibilities and challenges of getting your IP off the screen and into everyone's hearts by turning pixels into plushies or giving them a life in the real world. So, Jo Redfern is a leader in children's media with almost 2 decades of experience in content strategy. She's worked on brands such as Peppa Pig, and at a variety of broadcasters and studios such as Disney and BBC's Children's and Education Department. Her passion is for developing content at the intersection of entertainment, education and technology, primarily across digital platforms such as YouTube, Roblox, TikTok and Fortnite, thus engaging young people where they most spend their time. Of late, she's been creating strategies of how young people will consume media in the metaverse and how it might develop opportunities for new kids' IP. Her passion is to create future-forwarded brands that make young people happy, that spark their imaginations, and that make learning enjoyable. Claire Underwood is an animated series director with over 25 years of industry experience. She's spent most of her career heading up BAFTA-winning studio Pesky alongside her partner, David Hodgson. As a company director, her experience and knowledge is deep and varied. She's created and directed TV shows from concept through all stages of production to licensing. She's made websites and games, designed characters, logos and branding, and produce style guides. Claire created and directed Bodge on CBeebies, a property that went beyond TV and into licensed products, apps, and a visitor attraction. More recently, she's worked at Blue Zoo, Lupus, and Beakus, as well as lecturing at Brighton University. So welcome to both of you. And Jo, I believe you're going to present first for everybody.
I am, yes, right. I'm going to have one last slip of my tea while I share my screen, and then we're off. Okay, well, thank you for having me back. It's nice to be back after yesterday's session, which was very enjoyable. This is the second of my great passions after chatting yesterday about the opportunity for animation and animators in the metaverse. Yes. How do you get your animated characters off the screen and into merch? Well, it's the perennial question, as you said, actually, Saint. I've worked in and around merch for the greater part of that 20 years that you reminded me of there. Thank you very much. Yeah, having spent some time at Disney, I mean, really, Disney, the masters of leveraging their IP into merchandise, and boy, do they know how to do it. You know, I've also worked with brands. I did a short stint at WWE, again, a whole entertainment genre in and of itself, and again, huge business from their licensing and merchandise. And yes, kind of via Peppa Pig to CBeebies, I had the joy and the honor of working at CBeebies at a time when we licensed that brand into Merlin to create the CBeebies Land theme park and the hotel in Alton Towers. And again, how brilliant to see your characters under that CBeebies banner appear on walls in bedrooms in hotels. There is nothing quite like it. So given that it's kind of an ambition, I would hazard a guess, it's kind of ambition for most animators and people that work in animated IP to see that character or that world or the creations on merch at some point. But boy, it's not easy. And there's lots of considerations before you even get there. So I've tried to create a bit of a presentation to outline what some of those key factors are, and hopefully we'll be able to expand on that and answer some questions afterwards. Now, I haven't been in the weeds of animation as much as Claire has, but I have been on the kind of the business end of it. So that will be the lens mainly through which I talk about. So 4 slides after this: the what, the who, the when, and the how. And I'll go into a few things to consider in each. So what does make good merch? Well, the power of distinctive design. You can see the minions there, pretty recognizable. If you saw a small pill-shaped yellow creature, you're going to say it's a minion, pretty recognizable. We tend to think about merch, as you can see there, as physical things, but actually there's a rise in digital merchandise and this new word, phygital, a combination of both physical and digital merchandise. But there's money to be made in that sphere too. You've got to think about who your merch is for. Is it for preschoolers? Is it for older kids? You can have very broad fandoms. Again, I mentioned WWE. They have got fans, old and young. But actually, you've got something like Cocomelon, which is very, very concentrated on the very young preschool. Who's buying it? Are you servicing people at a life stage, or have we got this bigger fandom? Again, even the word Disney, given that it's just the studio name in and of itself, has a fandom that stretches almost cradle to grave. When is the optimum time? Well, you need fans to be able to leverage them to sell merchandise, but when is the optimum time to do that? Do you go early and service those true fans that have found you first, and they can be a very compelling group of people to get merchandise to, or do you wait until you've got more mass market awareness? Do you go for the kind of the ubiquity approach? There's also challenges over, if you license your product too much, you will probably all have felt it when you can't walk into a store without seeing merchandise for a certain thing. You can overextend. And very often with retailers, if sales drop, you're delisted from shelves and it's very difficult to get back on. So making sure the timing is right is key. And we'll have a quick chat about Disney, their flywheel. If you've not heard of the Disney flywheel, essentially you can look it up online actually from a good 50 years ago. But in terms of all the different spokes of Disney's flywheel, they've got their theme parks, they've got a movie studio, they've got TV, they've got streaming. Actually, that's a very compelling way to get merchandise out there and to keep it selling. There's ways that you can leverage your own little mini flywheels, and we'll talk about that. And again, how are the sources, the traditional sources of these, what we call franchise brands? Franchise brands are animated IP that do extend out off screen. Well, how are the sources of those changing? Originally, it was books, might go into comics, then movies. Actually, there's lots of different sources for successful merchandise programs these days, gaming being one, and we'll chat about that. So let's dig into that power of distinctive design. Well, he's my favorite, SpongeBob. If you think about the power of distinctive design, there is no better example, really. If you saw him in silhouette, you would know who he was. He's a little yellow sponge with trousers and a tie. I mean, he is so recognizable. And actually that really helps when your characters are on shelf. If you remember walking up and down the aisles of Toys R Us before they closed, the more distinctive designs would jump off the shelf. That's why you have packaging design experts, but actually that's why the importance of good character design really helps. But it's not just about the design, it's about the relatability. Do kids really fall in love with that character? And don't forget the parents, because it's their wallets you're trying to break into. So is there a relatability there? And what's interesting here is if you think about Peppa Pig, if you've ever watched Peppa Pig, or if you've ever watched Bluey, which is a brilliant animated show at the moment. Those characters are relatable, but they're relatable to both those audiences. They're relatable to the children, but there's stuff in there for the parents. Don't forget about the parents, because actually you want to worm your way into their hearts too, because ultimately, as I said, it's their wallets you're also trying to break into. So again, no substitute for good storytelling, but try and build in that relatable element that your audience can identify with. And that's in terms of design and in narrative in your story design as well. There's other things to think about with merchandise: volume, collectability. You'll see behind Claire there, actually, she's got a whole raft of characters. Very often, you don't just want to hang your merchandise program, and particularly toy, if we're talking for kids, on one particular character. So volume of characters in animation is also quite important to toy companies when they are considering taking a license. You can go as broad as you like. You might all remember Moshi Monsters or Pokemon that have got literally hundreds of characters. That collectability, we know that kids and young people are inherent collectors and traders. So actually thinking about how many characters that you might want to create is also interesting. And again, I said, thinking about digital and phygital. So we tend to default to, those of us that have been around the block a few times, we tend to default to physical merch, and we talk about kids' toys, and we talk about backpacks and lunchboxes and things like duvet sets. Increasingly now, as kids spend more and more of their time online and in gaming environments, we've got Roblox and we've got Fortnite. This concept of digital merchandise is coming to the fore. So again, kids are on Roblox, they're interacting and playing in their favorite worlds and experiences and with their characters. They also want to buy merchandise relating to those characters digitally. Again, you might have heard about how often kids on Roblox are changing the appearance of their avatars. You can have a little army walking around in t-shirts with your characters on digitally, and they might just pay small amounts, microtransactions for that digital merch, but actually it can be quite a compelling and quite a big revenue stream. So the rise of digital merchandise is not to be ignored. And again, phygital is the combination of the two. Again, you can buy something physically, and you might get a code with that gives you a digital replica of that piece of clothing for your avatar online. So it's an interesting way to grow fandom from people that have found your characters, your IP and your stories, wanting to own elements of it. No longer is it just physical, it could be digital, or it could be a mixture of the two. So thinking across is a really interesting thing. So, well, here we are. We're back to WWE having, like I said, the masters of taking their IP into merchandise. You think about who is your merchandise for, and what will they be doing with that merchandise? How does it relate to the characters that you've created? Well, typically we think about preschoolers. Actually, they like familiarity and like role play. They like recreating scenarios that they're familiar with. There's imaginative play, but it tends to be centered around them, their lives, the families, or the homes. Again, you've got to think about, if it's for older kids, what are their behaviors? Actually, how might they want to buy merchandise related to your product? We know that the potential to purchase things digitally is aging down. A lot of kids, even 6 and 7, are asking for gift cards in Robux, for example, or V-Bucks from Fortnite. So thinking about their purchase habits, how can you create merchandise that is going to fit in with their current purchasing habits? So that, again, we come back to that digital purchase. And again, we think about life stage versus this true fandom. You can go through trends. Collectability and merchandise can be very trend driven, which means, you really want to capitalize whilst your particular IP or character is in trend, or actually we've got more enduring fandom, like I said about Disney or WWE, that's much broader, and you can really leverage the your broader fan base. We're thinking about all of these things. They are just having in the back of your mind as you're creating, in terms of creating characters and IP and stories that fit in to that kind of almost buying psychology of your audience. What we can do, when? Yes. When will it launch? Well, this is, again, the perennial question. Timing is everything in licensing and merchandise. It's when IP begin to pop in popularity, it's easy to think that you might be able to sustain a licensing or a merchandise program, but actually not quite ready yet. Again, a lot of the big master toy companies will want to see evidence of really big viewing figures, or what views on YouTube, plays on Roblox or Fortnite now, to actually really evidence that demand to sustain a consumer products market. However, when you've got avid fans, if you've created something that might be slightly more niche, you might think, well, you could go a little bit early to a smaller group of fans. You can actually go direct to consumer, that D2C there. It's much easier these days to actually do it yourself. There are certain companies that you can create your own web shops, print on demand companies. Actually, it might be better to consider that as a route to your fan base and almost cut out big toy companies or merchandise licensees. So there is that option, and that is getting easier to do than mass market. One of the reasons that going direct to consumer is an option is the challenge of retail space as well. More and more people are shopping online. The amount of space, the physical shelf space at retail is reducing for licensed merchandise. And it'll be no surprise to hear that the big companies like Disney control the majority of that shelf space. It can be super hard to get listed in Walmart in the States or in the big grocers here. And again, almost going back to toy, the age of lots of toy shops, unfortunately, is behind us. So it's a real challenge at retail. So considering other ways to get merchandise and products to your fans is worth thinking about. Again, I mentioned the perils of overextension. It's easy to think that actually, if you can make merchandise, that everybody's going to want everything. And particularly if, there have been times, I will say Minions here. There was a while when you couldn't move for Minions merchandise. Actually, it can get to the stage where that turns around and becomes a disadvantage. People get slightly sick of everything having that brand on it. So you can overextend, particularly young people don't like to think that there's label slapping going on. That will turn them off a brand and an IP very quickly. Again, well, that picture there is actually of a Disney princess wedding dress, which I think is a really interesting example of licensing, because it's easy to think that, Disney princesses are the preserve of young girls in very brightly coloured dress up, pretending to be Princess Tiana or Ariel. But actually, Disney princesses do grow up. And when I talk about this enduring fandom, there are grown-ups that still love Disney and want to be a Disney princess on their wedding day. So a few years ago, when I stumbled upon the licensed range of Disney princess wedding dresses, and they are beautiful and very high-end, it was a real kind of wake-up call, a masterclass in licensing to fans that actually have grown up with your brand. And it's a very interesting, it's an interesting website to go and have a nosy around if you like looking at gorgeous wedding dresses. So then I think, yes, the last one. So I mentioned at the top of this, how are the sources of these big merchandise programs changing? Well, we've gone through Harry Potter, PJ Masks, two brands you might be familiar with. They started in books. Of course, the Marvel Cinematic Universe came out of comics. Gaming has been, with Sonic and Pokemon, but actually these days is a very fertile ground for new big franchise IP. If you have any youngsters in your life that go onto Roblox, you might have heard of the behemoth game that is Adopt Me, that's had billions of visits and is now it's taken on a licensing director. They are doing merchandise deals. I hear that there are studios clamoring to get the rights to create animated content out of Adopt Me. So gaming can be a great source of franchise brands and merchandise programs. YouTube, again, YouTube is a powerful way to grow brands. It's tricky to scale on YouTube. We've got CoComelon, which more or less owns preschool YouTube, if you've seen any of it. But actually, we know that young people, certainly Gen Z, who are kind of late teens and early 20s, and down to Generation Alpha, which are kids, YouTube is their primary destination for entertainment. It's no longer broadcast or even streamers, it's YouTube first. They still watch the others, but actually it's YouTube first. Therefore, there are brands and animated IP that are popping on YouTube first, and CoComelon is probably the biggest example of that. And now we're moving into this era of almost celebrity creations that are being born on social media. And here's Quay Quay. So Quay Quay is the doll of Serena Williams' daughter. And she started posting about Quay Quay and this doll that her daughter loved on her Instagram. Of course, she's got millions of followers on Instagram. And there is a company, an IP creation company called Invisible Universe, that saw an opportunity to build a new franchise brand, leveraging the fandom that Serena Williams had on her Instagram and her socials. So they started making little animated skits with Quay Quay, and she now has her own Instagram account, and she's creating animations and posting. There's animation posted weekly. She's got a YouTube channel. She's also got a book out. So again, growing animated IP from leveraging fandom across social media. Quay Quay has been now followed by, I can't remember his name, it's a dog that belongs to Jennifer Aniston. So this idea of actually growing animated franchise brands from leveraging the two powerful strands of celebrity fandom and doing it on social media is a really interesting development, and one to watch for sure. So that's the end of my little bit. Hopefully it's prompted some questions that we can come back to after Claire has spoken. But fascinating, fast moving, changing all the time in terms of how you get your animated IP off the screens and onto those products. But hopefully that's given a bit of an overview of the key considerations.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. And yes, if anybody has any questions, pop them in the chat and they'll get sent to us, and we'll pop them in at the end and talk through them. Before I just go to Claire, I just have one question, Joe, if you don't mind, and that is, do you have a sense that kids have more spending power now since COVID? And did COVID sort of do anything to the markets? And I mean, people were collecting more or buying more merchandise?
I think, I don't know about volumes. I mean, obviously when retail and shops shut, a lot of the purchasing went online. But in terms of where kids sought entertainment, that also, we were all locked up at home. So the grown-ups tended to watch Netflix and the TV, and the kids went online and were gaming. And that's when that platform Roblox really took off, because kids could go and hang out on Roblox. So certainly what I have noticed is that talking about this digital merchandise, their spending power, I don't know if it's necessarily increased, but it's shifted in terms of where they're spending it. So again, I talked about microtransactions. 20% of Roblox users that go on Roblox every day will change their avatar's clothing every day. And they are seeking out merchandise from their favorite characters, or they're looking for the latest, digital Nike drop. And actually, it's becoming a real part of spending, particularly for for younger people who place as much importance on their digital identity as they do their physical identity. So if they wanted to wear a t-shirt relating to their favorite brand in real life, it's likely that they want to replicate that look and that fandom online as well. So a lot of that spending has moved online. They might not be paying the same amount, but they might be paying more times. Again, I go back to these microtransactions, more frequent but lower kind of value. But actually, that's turning into quite a compelling revenue stream. And you can read about digital designers on Roblox who are there kind of uploading new things for kids and young people to buy every day, and they're making quite a nice living out of it.
Thank you. And folks, if you want to hear more about all things metaverse, do check out the metaverse discussion we had yesterday, which Joe was part of, when it drops onto YouTube or wherever it goes, but you'll have access to it soon. Anyway, Claire, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Whoa. There we go. Stick that over there. That was really interesting. Should have come to your talk before we did our licensing. But yeah, so I'm Claire. I'm an animated series director. I spent most of my nearly 30 years career heading up Pesky, a small independent studio, alongside my partner David Hodgson, and amongst many other things, I created and directed Bodge on CBeebies, a property that went beyond TV to licensed products and a visitor attraction. So today I'm going to talk about the highs and lows of our licensing journey with Bodge, and it should be an honest account of how a small company with very few resources and lots of naive enthusiasm gets pixel to product. So Bodge started development in 2007, and we were in production in 2012 to 2014, and then for a few years after that we were pushing the licensing and building the brand. So Bodge is a show about friendship, creativity, thinking outside of the box. Bodge is a little Australian burrowing bilby, and his family have just popped up in Giggly Park, and he's making new friends for the first time. And Bodge is full of creative, messy fun. He likes to upcycle things in a bodgy way with string and glue, but he's also social glue, as he helps to bond his friends and the community with his improvised bodge-a-boom ideas. So the show had good viewing figures, and we felt confident that the brand could live beyond TV. You can't even really think about getting a licensing deals without having 26 half hours of content, and that's normally 2 seasons, and we had 2 seasons, 52 11-minute episodes. Even before production, when raising the money to make the TV show, we realized that broadcaster pre-sales just isn't enough to make the budget add up. So even with all those different countries buying in, we needed some private investment, and we had to entice them with the idea that this would be the next Peppa Pig and that they'd make millions of pounds and we'd all be happy. So we were thinking about the licensing even up front. Then as soon as the show aired, we started our social media, mostly on Facebook. People were asking for plush toys, and a few people have made their own, which I just love this one. This is my favorite. Actually, that one's pretty funny too. And we had the parents who really liked the philosophy of Bodge's making stuff. So we created lots of sort of DIY craft things like make your own Bodge sewing kit, knitting a Bodge jumper, and we made sort of YouTube videos of craft activities they could do with upcycling and recycling. So people were buying into the brand without actually buying anything at this stage. And in the absence of any toys to buy, we did encourage people to actually buy off a crafter on Etsy who was making all these Bodge toys. We thought they were quite charming. You know, it could have infringed on copyright or meant that they weren't going to buy the real toys when they came. But these small numbers of people that were posting about these loving these toys, you know, we just thought we're sort of helping the early adopters spread the word and, you know, sort of getting it out there. And we also got lots of t-shirts printed, and we ran lots of competitions with lovely Jason Donovan there, who did the voice of Bodge's dad. And, you know, those kids who are wearing the t-shirts are obviously advertising for us. Even if it's on a small scale, you just get it out there with the early adopters. So once we'd finished production, but before any licensees came on board, we rolled out some small scale events, mostly along the lines of junk modelling and upcycling. So we got kids making musical instruments and having fashion shows through different events. So this is Recycle Week. And we sent 3 schools Bodge in a Box, a little activity pack with Bodge stickers, colouring sheets and activities, and got them to do some upcycling sort of craft projects, and then they would be posting them on social media. So it just sort of got a little bit of a buzz going on Recycle Week and helping Bodge connect with recycling and worthy causes. And then we'd also did it at a local festival, Elderflower in Sussex, and in my hometown of Lewes, we did a boat making afternoon at a upcycling event. And we also connected with mummy bloggers who are really great influencers, and they held things like a Twitter party where you'd send them all the gear and the stickers, and they'd have a party with some kids, and then they'd be posting about it on Twitter, and just all these things just to create, get the brand alive. The first license we got was for a costume character. He's sitting behind me here, and that was with Rainbow Productions. So we hope that these small local events could be rolled out bigger at big festivals and shopping centres where Bodge could turn up. And it involved us making a 3D version of him, because obviously he had like a thick black outline and he was very 2-dimensional. So we had to really sort of interpret him into 3D. And there he is with his showbiz pals. He didn't get many outings. I think his high point was turning on the Christmas lights at Wolverhampton. But I think, that would be anyone's highlight. So my pesky partner, David, is full of out-of-the-box thinking, and we approached the whole licensing strategy in quite an unconventional way. And we got in touch with Save the Bilby Fund in Australia. We approached them because we had an Australian TV deal, and we thought that in Australia they could promote Bodge with the real life Bilby and tie it together. So we went over to Australia and met them, and got to meet some Bilbies, and then we got a bit carried away and got all excited about getting a Bilby in a zoo in the UK, and that this would help sort of give a good PR angle. And also we thought it was important to sort of try and tie in the Bilby connection, because having an animal, a key character as an obscure animal that no one's heard of, was a little bit of a stumbling block. And so to create more Bilby awareness, we thought was useful. Anyway, we spent a couple of years trying to get the Bilbies to the zoos, and it never did happen. But we got a long way, talking about breeding programs with European zoos, and we were really completely out of our zone. So then we started going to the trade fairs, brand licensing and toy fair, and the licensing expo in Vegas. And we were thinking about Bodge as a brand, and we started to realise that really he's a bit of an anti-plastic toy brand. He's all about creativity, upcycling, a kind of anti-buying new. He encourages you to make your own fun. And that idea was, the idea of Bodge came from my heart. I was a parent of a small child who had lots of plastic tat in the house, and you'd give her a present and she'd be more interested in the box, playing with the box than the toy. So I knew we didn't really want to go from plastic toys. We thought craft kits would be the way to go, or play tunnels, or so they could play at burrowing, or musical instruments. And we drew up this toy pitch document, and went to Toy Fair, and we approached the craft kit makers, the musical instrument people, and the tunnel people, thinking that they'd jump at Bodge because it was such a perfect tie-in for their product. But straight away we realised that these smaller licensees don't really want to get involved until we got a master toy license, because they really do rely on the TV advertising of the hero toys to drive the brand that in turn drives the customers to them. So we put our principles to one side and have meetings with the big toy companies like Flair, Vivid, Character, Spin Master, and they all asked the same thing. They said, right, what's Bodge's gadget? What's his vehicle? What does he wear? Thinking that the kids would play as Bodge, they'd need his gadget, that would be the toy, you know. And all the strong brands of that time, like Doc McStuffin had a doctor's set, Ben 10 had his special watch, Paw Patrol had their vehicles. And we went, no, he doesn't wear any clothes and he doesn't have a prop and he just has glue and string. You know, we sort of came away thinking that Bodge had some really fun play patterns like the burrowing and that the kids would love to enact, but the story scenario, and good story scenarios that they could maybe play with figurines, but it was sort of an anti-toy brand. So in the meantime, we've been making a style guide and we worked with design agency called Skew, who specialize in developing TV brands. And we learned so much from them. They helped develop a new color palette that was much zingier than anything on the TV series. And they were very careful to make sure it felt very gender neutral. And then we came up with designs that were able to be put onto clothing or lunch boxes, and lots of sort of inspiring images like this for apparel and party wear. And I think it really lifted the brand. You could really now see how Bodge could pop on the shelves and stand out. And looking back, a lesson learned is that I would do this process right from before I'd even started coming up with the idea, because you know, we ended up with a title sequence with quite brown colours in, you know, this sort of upcycling cardboard look, and actually it then didn't tie in so well with the brand as we developed it. So we didn't get a master toy license, but we did start to get some interest. So the first deal we got was West Midlands Safari Park. We'd approached them because we wanted to find a zoo to host a bilby, and it turned out that they wanted a TV character for the refurbishment of their new kids play area. So it was just right time, right place. And this is Giggly Park. It's still there, I think. Ended up being a sort of adventure playground with a big burrow and play equipment and a Airstream diner, just like we had in the show. And it was really fun. It was really fun. We went to the opening. I mean, it was all branded with two-dimensional cutouts, graphics from the show. Then Sega got interested after hearing West Midlands Safari Park were on board. Now they make plush, not for retail, but for grabber machines and tourist attractions. But we hadn't managed to get a retail plush license, so we went with them, and they were really good to work with. You'd expect their product to be much lower quality, but I was really impressed that they were very willing to go with really soft fabrics that were, you know, good quality, and I think they did a really good job. And then the next thing, Paul Lamond took a gamble where others didn't, and made these puzzles and craft kits. And they were very enthusiastic about it. But unfortunately, the man who commissioned it died very suddenly, like within a couple of weeks of us launching these things, and the whole company sort of had to find their feet again. So I don't think it really got distributed as it could have done. So they sort of fizzled a little bit. Then we got magazine deals, and this is a really great thing to get quite early on. So we had 3 different companies, Redfern, Kennedy and Immediate, and Bodge would appear in these multi-character magazines. And Redfern, great, and they were very keen on Bodge. He was very popular amongst their readers. So they did a punt on a standalone Bodge magazine. And this is the closest we ever got to a plastic toy. It was on the cover mount of the magazine, and I've got to say I felt really uncomfortable about it being, you know, having morals about what I wanted to do, because I knew that this was probably created in a Chinese sweatshop, and it really made me feel quite uncomfortable. And but anyway, morals aside, it was a great magazine, but it didn't get quite the numbers that they needed, so they didn't go ahead with a full production. So the other deals we got were DVDs, video on demand, apps. We made 3 games and 3 interactive books. We had the music published, and Picture House Cinemas licensed it to show at their preschool screening events. So we carried on with our social media, building the buzz. We like to show kids playing with the toys or having their bodgy birthday parties. We got lots of requests on social media for plush toys, and they knew they existed because they'd seen photographs of them, but they couldn't buy them. So we started selling them on Amazon as a sort of, you know, through ourselves really. And it's very unconventional to do that, but we had no other deals on the table. People wanted the products products were sitting there and not really being sold. So we did do that, but then a lot of the fans were in Canada, Australia, South Africa, America. And so we ended up doing a lot of posting those things out independently because they weren't on Amazon in those countries. So we ended up wearing many different hats, trying to do lots and lots of different jobs that were totally not making animated TV shows anymore. Then the last things to keep the brand alive, obviously get the YouTube channel up there. And we gave it over to Little Dot, who manage it for us, and they create lots of content, lots of sort of edited together different videos, and they also sort of oversee our rights, making sure that nobody's sort of ripping it off, and that's great because you have to eventually move on to new projects and you don't have time to oversee all this sort of thing. So yeah, as a small independent company going it alone, I feel like we had some success. You know, we had a visitor attraction, which is incredible. Normally that would come right at the end, but we, you know, it was a sort of upside down way. It came very early. And we hoped more success would come, but the products weren't quite taking off as we hoped. And then the biggest disaster, of course, is that CBeebies didn't commission any more shows. And within 5 years, it was off the air. So it just started to fizzle out. Did have a bit of time on Netflix, and obviously it's showing in lots of other countries, but you can't just keep ploughing the energy in. And at some point, you've just got to decide enough's enough, really. So at that point, Pesky was just David, myself, and one lovely employee, Sarah. But we just ran out of money, so she left. So that was around 2018. And at the end of the day, people like Paul Lamond, Sega, West Midland Safari Park would all have given us an advance, and they paid for all this manufacturing costs of their products and things. And how it works really is that these long lead times for making products, these guys have to gamble as to whether your show is going to be a success in 18 months, 2 years time and beyond. Which unfortunately in this case, like many other shows, it wasn't. And so they really didn't make any money. And now there's a huge visitor attraction, and younger kids just won't even know who the characters are because it's not on TV anymore, unless they're watching it on YouTube or somehow watching it. So it was a really fun journey, and it's amazing to think that my little idea that, you know, I scribbled down one day came to all that. And I've got no regrets, but I've got to say it was a lot of hard work, and, you know, I'm not sure I've got the energy to do it again in a hurry.
Claire, thank you very much for that sort of bittersweet story, I guess. And I just wondered if, you know, the internet particularly has a way of surprising us, and it would only take Bodge to turn up on one site somewhere or be mentioned on some on Stranger Things or something like that to revamp it. Do you think that kind of, you know, return might be possible with an IP like Bodge? It could suddenly take off.
Yeah, I mean, those things do happen. And we thought about that for our other show, which is sitting behind there, The Amazing Adrenalini Brothers, because that was really funny and could have genuinely been remade or you know, it's a bit timeless. But we made that not in HD, so you can't show it anymore, really. It's I think it was just widescreen, but not HD. And you know, so there'd be probably only a matter of time until Bodge in its own format is not going to be viable to show on TV. Something will change. So that's one thing that sort of hinders it, unless of course, you know, it gets remade all over again.
Yeah, so there is a built-in obsolescence in terms of the sort of technical specifications for any kind of TV-based character, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was also interested, before we go to the main questions, and just a reminder, folks, if you have any questions, do put them in the chat for us. but we got loads of questions lined up already. And I was very interested, that you really seem to go to town on social media, and you talked about the mummy bloggers, and you were very keen to get parents involved with the knitting kits. It seems like you did everything that you could, but is there anything there you look back at and go, well, we should have done something slightly differently?
Well, I think I remember at the time when Bodge came out, another show called Bing came out pretty much the same week. And Bing is made by a big company, and they've got a huge marketing budget. And we had a marketing budget of nothing. And, apart from our sort of production fee, which we sort of ploughed back into it. And, with social media, to be able to actually get a post under somebody's nose in Facebook, you have to spend money. And so, if we ran a competition where you're asking people to interact with it and you get hundreds of comments, of course, that would get some sort of thing going. But any other social media that you're trying to do, you'd have to pay to sort of get it under people's noses. And really, you'd have to pay a lot to get it under a lot of people's noses. So, yeah, we just had we didn't have the budget to really promote things like that. And, we didn't have the money we did work with a few different agents and a few different independent sort of people who came in and helped us with certain things, but of course we didn't have the money to really get those people with all that expertise. So we were like just a bunch of little people in a little room doing it on our own, which was kind of charming. But I think we would have had to have really been bought out by a bigger company who could have taken it on and done all that for us.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware that there's probably lots of students, animation students and others, who may have characters or ideas that they want to also, bring out from the screen. So I'll try to make a few of these questions relevant to them. But the first question I had really was one for Claire and then one for Joe, and that is, Claire, how far do you have to think of revenue from physical media or merchandising when developing an IP? Or is it always after the fact? So, you've developed Bodge as a character, and then you think of the merchandise and all the different ways you can get Bodge off the screen, so to speak. Or is it you start off saying, well, we've got to develop a character which is, going to shift so many units, and it's going to be available for parents as toys, blah, 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 blah. So it's the idea is right there at the start that it will have a life beyond being just an animation series.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people will be thinking right up front about the merchandise and making what you call like toyetic brands. They're thinking already about all the vehicles and all the figurines and the prop and the costume and everything else right from the word go. I mean, that's not how I wanted to approach it, because I wanted to make a show that I really resonated with me and came from the heart. But that's because I'm a real sort of creator. I've come from an animation background. I like stories and drawing, and I wasn't thinking about it so commercially. But of course, we did think about it commercially enough because we had to, because we knew the budget wasn't going to add up and we would have to do something like that. But maybe in retrospect, of course, really pushing an animal that nobody's ever heard of was probably the biggest hindrance of the whole thing, because you've already got to get them to understand what it is. If it was a rabbit, they go, oh, it's a rabbit show. Yeah, right, on with who it is. Instead, they're sitting there working out, what is this thing? And I didn't think that really mattered when I came up with it. I wanted him to be an odd animal that's an outsider. And that was the story, is that he's an odd person who can come into a different environment. But that maybe was a bit of a problem. But yeah, I think you've got to think to some degree, because you're not going to break even unless you have licensing. And but yes, how far you go with that and whether you make the toys actually the crux of the idea is something else.
Thank you. And Joe, you tend to come in later on in the pipeline, so to speak of, and I wanted to ask you about a development that comes the other way around. In other words, have you any experience of like toys and physical media first that then became animation because they gained a certain amount of recognition?
It can happen, obviously. I mean, many years ago, there used to be a ruling, certainly in the UK, that you couldn't make an animation that went on broadcast that came from a toy. I think that was an Ofcom rule back in the day. So, that was the reason that Barbie always went straight to video. And Barbie didn't have a terrestrial or a network-based show. I don't necessarily think that's the case currently. And also, we've got YouTube that isn't necessarily subject to that kind of same regulation. So yes, content can come from toy. Like I said, it can come from gaming. It came from Serena Williams' daughter's doll. Actually the idea can come from anywhere. What I think certainly I'd like to say, and it bears out Claire's point, is that it's really hard to get licensed merchandise out there and make a success of it. And if your whole project is predicated on that, it's going to be a slog, unless you have got huge marketing budgets to buy your way to scale, or certainly give your IP a huge leg up in the first instance, because it is scale that sells merchandise. And it used to be that having it on a broadcaster like the BBC or ITV was enough. Then YouTube came along, and you also had to have a YouTube presence. Again, you look at Cocomelon, that gets billions of views a month, but it's still even tricky for someone of their scale to sell merchandise. So, you can create something like a Paw Patrol that, to all intents and purposes, is a long form toy ad. But actually, I would argue that there is no substitute for good characters and good story. And then hopefully that does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of getting your audience to fall in love with your characters and your stories enough that they might consider buying merchandise at some point. But it's a slog, as Claire said. You have to think about what platforms it's on, how much audience you've got. You've got to work socials relentlessly. If you're doing it yourself, you almost have to work 24 hours a day working those socials. Or if you have some budget, you get someone to work it for you. It's non-stop to even get to the point where you might just beginning to pique the audience's interest in terms of them buying something related to your show. So, I think, without wishing to sound too pessimistic, I think it is challenging. The one thing that I think is a positive, in that Claire's experience goes back a number of years. And actually what we're seeing these days, given that the world of media entertainment is fragmenting, but we're more connected than ever, actually niches are popping up around shows, around interests. So actually, you don't have to be the biggest show in the world and go for mass and only be able to sustain merchandise if you are a mass market brand. Actually, there are ways that you can just develop a relationship with more niche audiences now. And actually, you can make nice money and nice revenue from a smaller base if you connect with your fans and you build that community. And it is much easier to do that than ever. You can, TikTok, you've got more channels to grow little communities. And again, alongside smaller manufacturers, more direct to consumer activity, web shops that you can build yourself on Shopify. Actually, it is much easier now to service a smaller fan base, but actually make a bit of income. I think, the days of people clamoring to get that last Buzz Lightyear and, multi-million-dollar merchandise programs are perhaps behind us for anything other than those massive studios. But that's not to say that it's impossible now. I think we just need to think about it a different way.
So, but budding animators shouldn't necessarily be chasing licenses, but rather thinking about opening an Etsy shop or something like that and creating, getting a bit of money that way, a bit of revenue that way. And who knows where it might lead as well. Yeah.
And, platforms like TikTok, to us oldies, it's still largely a mystery, but actually that's a really powerful content discovery tool. We know that millennial parents that have got young kids now are TikTok natives. They're on there looking for new IP and new content and new ideas of things to do with their children. So that can be a really interesting way to grow a community. And again, particularly younger parents these days are interested in who's behind it, following the story. You know, we live our lives online now. What one tip I would say to creators and animators is, as well as the IP that you're creating, maybe tell the story of, you know, as Claire's so eloquently done, share the bumps in the road, share the wins and the losses actually, you know, with communities, and start building that kind of fandom from the ground up, because they can also be the ones that are with you on that journey and that are rooting for you. And as Claire showed, they're the ones that'll make their own birthday cakes and share them on social media. They're the ones that will knit the jumpers. That's becoming even more compelling these days than trying to get the big, shiny US-based multinational toy company.
Yeah, and I was going to, that brings me on to the next question, actually, which for Claire, first of all, and, you know, you put a lot of effort into sort of physicality of your, of Bodge, you know, from the knitwear to the stickers, etc. Has the proliferation of new digital platforms taken sales away from physical media? You know, you can't play a board game if you're on PlayStation or on Roblox or whatever. You can't do, you know, there's only so much attention that you can pay. Do we still crave physical things? Is there something still special about the physicality of owning or having a toy or a collectible character?
It's hard for me to say, but it's probably more a question or something that you would see change in the way consumering is anyway, you know, with people just buying less stuff. And you know, and my daughter's 18 now, so I don't know if she's only on her phone, you know, so doesn't buy into much stuff, you know. So I'm assuming younger kids are like that too. Maybe Joe knows more than I would actually about that, so those sort of trends. But yes, I can imagine that the digital thing will really take off, you know, and like I say, we had a DVD deal, but you know, whilst we had the deal, within a year nobody bought DVDs anymore, you know, so it was all video on demand deals that we needed. But yeah.
So Joe, is there a real premium on physicality still? Is that still a premium thing to have?
I think for younger children, toys and physical products are still important. You know, we're even down to kind of fine motor skills and coordination and role play and all, you know, those developmental stages are still there. But I think kids are growing out of physical toys much younger as they do shift their play online, whether they're playing educational apps at 4 and 5, or then they graduate onto platforms like Minecraft, like Roblox, and that play there, I mean, the play patterns are still largely replicated, but it just doesn't require a physical thing. So that doesn't mean that it's any less important to them, but it does mean that they're not necessarily wanting to own that thing. They might still want to own a plushie of their favorite character, but it might not be 10 things like it used to be. It might be fewer. That combined with lots of environmental concern. Claire said, you know, as a parent, one of their motivations for Bodge was plastic tat, you know, and when my two were little, we had a lot of that stuff. And actually, younger parents these days are much more considered in their purchases because they don't want to essentially throw away the cover mount. You know, and it could last an hour and it got trodden on and it was in the bin. You know, so as a society and parents are increasingly thinking about how not to have so much plastic tat around. And similarly, they're demanding more of toys. Yes, some stuff is just about play, but actually, what else is it delivering for my child? Is there any educational value? So there's all of these considerations now that are influencing physical merchandise purchasing decisions. But again, there's other opportunities opening up online in terms of what kind of merchandise can you create for those consumers that have moved online. And similarly, you know, it's a smaller market, but grown-ups do still want to own things too. You know, we still like having the little Funko Pop bobbleheads on our desks and things. So actually, you know, there is still physical merchandise out there, but I think, you know, it's tricky. and the market will reduce, and it will also evolve and change.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're running out of time, so I'm going to make this the last question. And I'm thinking again about budding animators on the other end of this call. Would you recommend that budding animators who are maybe students of animation should have a business plan that includes merch when they're developing a character at college, or is that too much? Claire, what's your feeling on that?
I think I would say probably yes, just to sort of think about everything that you do in a sort of 360 way, because everything is like that in this world. And actually, you know, you might be developing what you think is a TV show, and it might end up being a publishing deal and a book. I mean, Bodge was a book when I came up with the idea, and sent it to all the publishers, and they all said, oh, it looks like a TV show. And of course it did, because I made TV shows. I was trying to wheedle out of TV and get into publishing. But, you know, so the more you think, every idea you come up with should almost exist as a whole, as a real entity in itself. You give it life, and it could then spring into life as it develops and opportunities arise, and you find the best home for it. So yeah, I don't think it would do it any harm. Of course, you know, if you're a little bit more truly creative and creating things from the heart, and you really just want to make a beautiful animation with just a beautiful story, don't get hung up on it, because, you know, we need beautiful stories and beautiful artwork, and, you know, things that really connect with us emotionally. And you know, so it sort of depends on the sort of thing you're trying to come up with. You know, if you're thinking of something that's kind of commercial, then I'd say go for it. Yeah,
it all starts with an idea and hopefully a beautiful product in one way or another. Joe, what do you think? Advice to budding animators with regard to business plans of merchandise and physical stuff?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. But again, to echo Claire, not to get too hung up on it. You know, there is, again, I'll say it again, there's no substitute for a brilliant idea and a brilliant IP that's got heart, that's, you know, so actually that has to stay at the center of it, that storytelling. There is no substitute for that. However, you know, if you're creating something, and Claire will have gone through this, you know, you're creating a pitch, you want to go to Kids Screen, or you want to go to a market and you want to get your show out there, it doesn't hurt to have done that thinking. Or if you are not able to do that thinking, there are people that will help you. You know, put a page at the end of your deck or your pitch that is, we've had to think about the play patterns, we've had to think about how this may extend, we've had to think about what educational problems it solves for parents, just to show that thinking will help get a potential broadcaster or an investor or a co-producer over the line. So, you know, Claire mentioned Skew in terms of you know, that's one thing that Skew do. They will create you some visuals, they'll look at style guide, they'll give you tips on how this thing might translate off screen. You know, I was at Contender Entertainment Group, who made Peppa Pig before E1 bought it. And of course, Peppa Pig was made in 2D cell action, and she had these teeny tiny spindly legs. But I remember even before Peppa Pig went on air, there was a toy company brought in figuring out how you turned this little 2D basic figure into a 3D turnaround for toys. So again, it doesn't hurt to try and get ahead of yourself a little bit and do a bit of that thinking, or find someone who can help you do that thinking. But again, there is no substitute for just for creating something just lovely, like Bodge. I go back to Bluey. You know, Bluey has nailed that kind of parental conversation that gets the parents kind of nodding and smiling along Riley, and the storytelling for the kids. That will do very well in consumer products. It's my big tip for this Christmas. But actually, it's because it comes from good storytelling. So don't worry. I would say don't get too hung up on that toyetic element, unless, of course, you're a spin master who created Paw Patrol for that very reason, in which case, you know what, that did happen back to front almost.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our time, and I do look forward to knitted versions of Claire, myself and Joe on the London International Animation Festival website in the future. And do remember, folks, that this is available on Eventive, evidently, for the next 7 days if you want to revisit this or any of the other talks that you've heard. Claire, Joe, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, and we hope to see you again soon. So thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.